Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the best ways to resolve this conflict, which is through dialogue and peace process. Now, it has been almost 10 months of the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. In fact, it was on 24th of February this year when Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation aiming for the demilitarization of Ukraine. Since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, India has consistently called for immediate cessation of hostilities and an end to violence. India has called upon both sides to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue and has also expressed its support for all diplomatic efforts to end this conflict. In a phone conversation on Friday, Prime Minister Modi reiterated his message that dialogue and diplomacy is the only way forward in the Ukraine crisis. He was having this conversation with Russian President Vladimir Putin, wherein both the leaders also evaluated India-Russia bilateral ties. Now, today we'll discuss and analyze the way forward towards resolving the Russia-Ukraine conflict and how both sides can be brought to the table. And for more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with retired Major General Dhruv Katoch is with us. He's Director, India Foundation. Welcome, General Katoch, to the studios. We're also joined by former Ambassador Anil Trigunath, and Pramitpal Chaudhary is also with us, Foreign Affairs Editor with the Hindustan Times. Welcome, both of you gentlemen as well. I'll begin with you, General Katoch, and let's first start by understanding what has happened, what has transpired in these almost 10 months, in say another less than a week's time, it will be 10 months since this conflict has begun. And looks like both sides have had their gains and losses, but the war continues.
Thank you, Vishal. Vishal, if you want to understand this conflict, I think when the Russians initially started it off, they were hoping to wrap it up within a week, basically through a regime change. Now, that didn't take place. And then, of course, NATO got its act together and they started supporting the Ukrainian president. So now this battle has stretched on for 10 months, and I don't see it closing as of now. Basically, fundamentally, I think the problem is, if you have to have a ceasefire between the two countries, what are the terms and conditions of the ceasefire? Now, if you accept the status quo, that is to Russia's advantage. And if you don't accept the status quo, and if you say, go back to where you were before the war started, then the people of Russia will ask President Vladimir Putin, why did you go to war? And if you accept the status quo as it is, existing today, then the people of Ukraine will ask President Zelensky, if you had to stop the war, then you could have stopped 10 months ago.
Done it.
So
Yeah.
I think there is a fundamental problem as far as both the countries are concerned. There would have been a ceasefire by now had the West not supported Zelensky with weapons and money flows and everything which they have, billions of dollars of aid have flown into Ukraine. Then he wouldn't have had the will and the capacity to fight. But in effect, NATO, or rather we can say the United States, is fighting a war against Russia using Ukrainian soldiers.
Okay.
Now, that is really what transpires to me. So as far as America is concerned, they are quite happy if the war carries on. Europe is in trouble, but they don't know how to get out of it. And as of now, regardless of all efforts being made, even by the Indian Prime Minister, who has once again appealed for peace and, a ceasefire from both the sides, as of now, I don't see that happening.
Okay. So that's the summary of it all. Now, Ambassador Trigunath, I'd like to bring you in here, and let's talk about that appeal which has been made time and again by the Indian side, and recently Indian Prime Minister in another phone conversation with the Russian President has impressed upon him that the best way forward is through dialogue and diplomacy. And this is not the first time we are saying it. And in fact, there are a few other nations which are making the same perhaps pitch, but not in that manner, not in that passionate manner. So how do you see these kind of suggestions coming in from world leaders like Indian Prime Minister making any impact there vis-a-vis, both sides, Russian president and the Ukrainian side as well?
Well, Vishal, is there any other choice? That is what the question is. There is no other. The war has to end somehow or the other, and the beginning has to be made through a ceasefire. So when, until and unless there is a ceasefire, you cannot talk of dialogue and diplomacy in a concrete manner. There has been, as we see, that Turkey tried very hard, and they were nearly, they had come to terms, and the war could have ended long time back. But then, when the team of Ukrainian team or Zelensky's team went back to Kiev, when they talked to British Prime Minister and the then Johnson and President Biden, then they changed the goalpost, saying that we'll defeat Russia. So that was then. But I think that today there is a greater realization that the war needs to come to an end, some kind, even if it'll be a low-key war which will continue for quite some time, maybe. But at the same time, as General Katos says, that it is a Hobbes' choice for both the leaders now. Who will back down and how will they back down? And who gets what after these 10 months? And it is difficult to justify to your own people exactly why this kind of death and destruction when you had to stop. So I think that at this moment, Indian Prime Minister has correctly said that dialogue and diplomacy is the only way. And frankly, there is no other way. I mean, the war, just how long can it continue? And both the countries, the world, everybody is suffering from this. So I believe that now there is a Putin also said that he wants to stop. I don't know what he told Prime Minister Modi in his talk when the readout clearly says that he briefed about the situation on the ground and how it is going to play out. But I don't think we have been talking to Zelensky at the moment. But I believe that the French president recently also spoke and very clearly mentioned that Russia's security concerns must be addressed. Now, that is a realization now, perhaps out of the kind of difficulties Europe is facing now. So, as General Katoch mentioned, the Europe is the worst affected out of this, and they are in a very difficult situation,
Okay.
and they could be the pivot for resolving the situation.
Okay, okay. Pramit, in this situation wherein it's like who blinks first, and it becomes really difficult for both sides to go ahead and take that call. How do you analyze the present situation when we're talking about this conflict? Because its direct impact is on European nations, but indirectly it impacts the entire world, economically speaking, and in many other ways as well.
Yes, and in fact, that's one of the reasons India worked out or acted as the primary negotiator for language at the G20 summit in Bali, where a joint communique was issued. And the point that where even Russia was prepared to agree to was that language saying that the economic consequences of the war were burdensome for everybody. And Russia has been susceptible to pressure from even African countries and the global south that ultimately this war is proving too costly, not in terms of the cost for the people, the countries are involved in fighting it, but for, as you've mentioned, the fact that it's affecting global energy supply, fuels, food supply, fertilizer, and feeding into pre-existing global inflationary trends. So that has been an area where you've seen common language come together. But ultimately, that does not affect the two combating nations because they are fighting ultimately about political survival, territory, and so on. Until recently, Russia was on the back foot. So therefore, there was really no political space or interest on the part of Ukraine to consider a negotiated settlement or even begin the process of negotiations. Now we've seen Russia, for example, in the area in the south, while Russia retreated to the Dnipro River, they retreated, should we say, in an orderly fashion. They did not the sort of collapse we saw in the north. Both sides seem to be preparing for one more round of attacks, offensives, probably with the new year, because the winter will allow them actually to function. Armor can fight in winter, that isn't a problem. But the real problem is they probably won't both want to take seize as much land as they can before the spring arrives, because when the mud comes in, then it's actually difficult to fight. We've seen the Americans slowly begin to tighten the kind of weapons that the Ukrainians get. So you've seen that the Ukrainians have requested even further long-range missiles, which so far Washington has declined to give them. And Russia is waging an economic war against Ukraine by using drones and so on, missiles to knock out a lot of their energy grid, their power grid, to make them suffer or weaken them as the winter progresses. But the point is that as long as one side believes that they are winning or they are actually progressing, there's no incentive for that group to come to the negotiating table. So what we'll probably see is sometime, again, some of the governments, Western governments I've spoken with, particularly in Europe, believe that by roughly March, when the rains do come, already we're seeing that the ability of either side to gain territory in a sizable amount in terms of the cost of human lives and so on is diminishing rapidly. At some point, both sides will feel that they can't get anything more out of fighting.
Okay.
Russia, I think, has already reached that point. Ukraine, I think, still needs to. So we'll see how that game goes. Right now, the international community's push is that you may continue to fight. That's fine. There's nothing we can do about that. But you can at least start to talk to each other, even as the fighting is going on. But at present, we haven't even reached that first step yet.
Okay. General Katoch, when we're talking about negotiations, when we're talking about diplomacy, dialogue, there has to be some common areas of interest as well, as Primit was also referring to one idea here. And when we're talking about how do we go ahead with initiating that dialogue process? Of course, ceasefire as of now looks like a far-fetched idea from both perspectives if you look at it. But from the international community's perspective, wherein India is also a major player, what more can be done, and what kind of common areas can be highlighted, which can then make both sides, Russia and Ukraine, see reason and perhaps come to the dialogue table?
Vishal, very frankly, I think if a ceasefire has to be imposed, then America should stop aiding Ukraine. And we will have a ceasefire coming in very, very quickly. But the point is the Americans don't want this war to end. It suits their strategic purposes because they are using the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. And their arms industry, so to say, is getting all the benefits, the profits. So there is a huge arms industry and there is a huge profits to be made. And because of this war, even Europe has now got onto the armament industry. And most of the weapons they are procuring is again from the United States. So, so there is this cartel which doesn't want the war to end. And so long as that state remains, I don't think it is up to the Ukrainians to give a decision. Now, as far as the Russians are concerned, if I look at the strategic picture today, they are in control of Donbass, or most of it, or at least the portion of it they want. They are in control of Zaporizhia, and they are in control of Kherson. Now, the withdrawal which took place in Kherson was a tactical withdrawal for the winter because they wanted a proper front line on the east of the river. And they've got that front line now, so now it will be very difficult to dislodge the Russians. If I have to actually look at a situation by which a possible outcome can take place, I think President Putin has to take the initiative. We are in a very critical time as far as the year is concerned. Within a few days, we'll have Christmas, and then we have the New Year. Now, this gives a strategic opportunity to President Putin to declare a unilateral ceasefire. And he can say, I hereby declare a unilateral ceasefire for 15 days from the 20th of December to the 5th of January for Christmas. And it'll go very well with the public. That is, so you have the opportunity. Whether he does it or not is different, but you have the opportunity now.
Okay.
Now, the advantage, I'll tell you, which will accrue, if for 15 days the big guns stop booming, then in Ukraine, for 15 days, they will be sleeping peacefully. After that, the people of Ukraine will tell President Zelensky, we don't want the guns to start again. Now, it is going to be a reverse psychological pressure, and I don't know how Zelensky is going to deal with that because he has been given a grace period. The only person who can give a grace period is President Putin. Zelensky can't do it. He can't declare a ceasefire. It is immaterial. He's got nothing. And he is not going to get back his territory. As far as Russia is concerned, they wanted control over the Black Sea. That was vital to their interests. That is why Crimea was vital to them. Okay. Now they have got control of the Black Sea. Crimea is safe because they have taken the Donbass region, they have taken Zaporizhia, and they have taken Kherson. So when you look at the map, it makes it very clear. But I think the one additional message which President Putin will give to them, if you don't stop the war, then I will take Odisha also and make Ukraine a landlocked country. Now, that will be the stick and carrot policy. He has the opportunity. I think he is the only person today in this world who has the chance to make peace. It depends on how great a statesman he is to take up that chance.
Okay. Mr. Tirgunayat, coming back to the international community and the opportunities available here, you're talking about how Turkey did make an effort in the initial stages there, but that came to a naught because the goalposts were shifted and the expectations were different from both sides. But in today's situation, and specifically when we're talking about how some of the European nations might be feeling, the heat of the conflict now becoming a bit of unbearable for them. In that situation, and when we look at India as well, and the ongoing, India's presidency of G20, most of these European nations who are active players, they are a member of G20 as well. Other countries also who have an, influence. Can there be a situation wherein, like minds can perhaps, come together in times to come, in perhaps weeks or months to come, when a bit more pressure can be put across on the other side, perhaps the Western powers, as Jal Katoch was referring to, those who are, pushing Ukraine from behind?
Well, I think they already are doing it. As you know, that President Zelensky had maintained for quite some time that he will not talk to Putin. But now he has changed his track and he's ready to talk to Putin. That is under the Biden pressure from President Biden. At the same time, what we are looking at is that President Putin definitely has a possibility that he can, seeing that he's also stretched beyond a point. I mean, nuclear weapons are not to be fought like the ordinary weapons or the traditional kind of warfare. So you may threaten with them, but when you start using them, you yourself get decimated, and he knows it very well. That's why he said, I'm not a fool. So I think that from that perspective today, even the Western countries, and I read some reports that the US's arsenal has also depleted significantly. The Raytheon and the big companies are saying that they will take 6 to 8 months to recoup whatever is provided or spent during this war from the other end. So this is something that every country is facing, that problem now, that your arms, your other equipment that is required is depleting rather fast for all of them. So the pace of the war in that way cannot continue. And how long can Russia continue to rain on the missiles? It's also impossible. So, but at the same time, I think that as General Katoch said, that during the Christmas, of course, that was turned down by Putin, that he was not thinking of any ceasefire at the time. But the Russian Christmas starts somewhat later, from the 7th of January. So I think that he can take that and not given to the pleasure to the West for that. So that's quite possible. But I think that countries like India will have to continue to maintain pressure for the simple reason that today we have become the real economic bailouts for them to a great extent. The African countries, the other countries who are consistently importing, I think China for that matter, and all of them are on the same page that this war needs to stop. So when this happens, and Putin has realized, and if you see the Putin's readout after Prime Minister Modi's discussion, he clearly said that these evaluations were conveyed to Prime Minister Modi. But as you know, it's a big power, so the big powers need some kind of face saving where they don't seem for domestic consumption are seen to be losing the face. So that's something that needs to be worked out. And I'm quite sure we have seen the grain deal that went on. Eventually, Russia joined it also with the Turkey's help. So all these are gradually going ahead. We have seen the exchanges of prisoners all along during this war with both sides, between Russia and Ukraine, as well as between Russia and the US. So I think that there are some back channel talks are going on, and we might soon see some kind of a discussion going forward where perhaps some talks can happen face to face.
Okay. Pramit, in your views, what can be from here onwards in the weeks to come be the common grounds for, sort of a diplomatic effort towards negotiations, towards ceasefire, one step ahead in the peace process? Because as of now, both sides are not talking. They're just, firing missiles and bombs at each other. That's all.
Correct. And I think the peace can only really come into play when both sides conclude, as I said earlier, that war is no longer getting them the political benefits that they had hoped. That at present definitely is not what Ukraine believes, because they see themselves as a victim of oppression, of an attack. So their view is that they need to grab as much territory as they want. And so they are going to continue to fight. Whatever Putin may have done in terms of economic damage to Ukraine, the polling evidence is overwhelming. The Ukrainians still want to fight, and they fully support Zelensky's efforts to continue to fight off the Russians. So it doesn't really matter. Nothing will matter until that changes. And at present, that, in my view, is not changing. The United States will continue to back Ukraine, even though there's strong evidence that the US Congress is starting to tire of the bills that they're having to pay. It's coming out of the US taxpayers ultimately who are paying for this. And you can see the Republican right and the Democratic left already saying that how long do we have to keep paying for this? But Biden is very clear that he cannot backstab Ukraine without massively imploding his own political support inside. And the Europeans are internally divided. The Central Europeans and the Nordics are by far the most militant. They are the ones closest to Russia, have the strongest sense of historical distrust of the Russians. France and the countries further away, France, Spain, and Italy, are the ones who are less concerned about Russia as a threat. But Germany, which is the most powerful economic player in Europe, is deeply divided internally. The coalition government that rules Germany, the Social Democrats, are pushing for negotiations at almost any price. But their coalition partners, the Greens, are very militant. They've become extremely anti-Russian, which is ironic given that they're a pacifist party originally, but now have become violently anti-Russian and believe that the war must be pursued till the end. So right now Europe is not as concerned as it was economically, because the winter is proving to be a bit milder than expected. And their stocks of LNG have now they've actually stocked up enough fuel for this winter at least. And you can see global oil and gas prices are now starting to fall as the Europeans pull out of the market from buying emergency amounts. So right now, it's really a Ukrainian call, in my view, and it has to be at least one more round of fighting before Ukraine can be persuaded that there's no more to be gained, or very little to be gained, if you wish, at the battlefield, and they're probably going to get more at the negotiations table.
Okay, fair enough. Final comment from you, General Katoch, before we bring this to an end, and this is about what India has been saying, India's role in this entire efforts at bringing both sides to the dialogue table, and this coinciding with the fact that India is now also the president of the G20 for this entire year, this summit which is going to happen. And before that summit, there are going to be numerous amounts of meetings, back channel talks as well. And of course, this conflict will definitely have some sort of play out there, because it has a lot of economic impact.
Oh, well, you see, I think at some point the conflict has to end. The only point is when. I mean, are we looking at 5 years, 10 years, or are we looking at a few months? And the quicker that takes place, the better it is. And I think this gives India the opportunity, specifically because we have the G20 presidency for this year, and it has just started. So I think we need to capitalize on this, get all the like-minded countries together as far as the G20 is concerned, because that is where the money lies. When you're talking about the G20, the money is there.
Indeed.
And using that influence, but without making it appear to each side that they are we are coercing them into it. You see, as the ambassador mentioned, face is very important to both the sides now. So it'll require very deft handling. That is one way. We continue with those efforts in one stream. The other way is perhaps through chance or mischance or whatever, there is a regime change either in Russia or in Ukraine. That will again give an opportunity. And the third, which I had already mentioned in the beginning, a unilateral ceasefire by Putin.
Okay.
I think he's the only person who can do it, in my opinion, as of now.
Okay. So these are the options there. Let's hope for the best here in terms of ensuring that peaceful solution is found for this conflict. Thank you so much, General Katoch, Pramit as well, and Ambassador Trigunat for sharing your views and insight. As our experts were pointing out, various aspects of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where we stand today, what are the possibilities, options available for bringing both sides to the negotiating table, ensuring that dialogue is the best way forward, something which India has reiterated time and again to both sides. We'll keep a close watch on this front and various other issues as well. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.